All right, welcome to Soapbox Theology. This is Pastor Gabe. Again, we're going through the book of James. This is, number 4. We're looking at verses 12 through 15. And again, the book of James is James writing to those that have been dispersed because of persecution. They've been fleeing for their lives, suffering, and James is writing to encourage them. And so, context picks up where he's given us a couple examples, the poor and the rich, and how they both will suffer, and they are not to rely on their means, certainly. So verse 12, just read it first. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is being tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Blessed is another way of saying happy. It's kind of the verbal form. Blessed will you be, or blessed are you, is the man who remains steadfast. So you remain, this is kind of going back to the earlier verse before. If you allow the endurance, the steadfastness, to take its course, you will be happy. Okay? In other words, it will benefit you greatly. You will start to see benefit in it. You will appreciate the benefit in it. You will grow, especially under trial. So and this is interesting because James is writing and he's recognizing that this is, like we said before, remember when it said count it as a test? He's kind of putting it here, he's saying, well, this is a trial. So like you are in some ways being watched. What are you going to do? How are you going to perform? Think of Job. How are you going to sustain this? How are you going to grow? For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life. So part of what this is saying is that we do develop character. We do grow as we continue, as we stay the course. There is so many things in the world that are going to try us, that are going to trip us up, that are going to challenge us, that are going to overwhelm us. But are we staying the course with God? Are we continuing on the way through the pain or the trial, or are we veering off? Are we running away, saying we're done? We can't handle it. In fact, I wonder, are we repeating trials? Are we repeating tribulations because we are not allowing the full effect to have its day, have its way? Are we ignoring the way that God is trying to grow us and to mature us? For when he stood the test, he will receive the crown of life. And this is interesting because it's kind of backing, panning out to a degree and saying, if you live your life this way, if you continue on this path, that is how you receive the crown of life. The book of Revelation says continually, if those who endure to the end will be saved. Like, are you talking about losing your salvation, Gabe? No, but the parable of the sowers makes it very clear, I think, that there's 4 seeds, right? The first seed is outright rejected. The next 2 grounds, however, are the rocky and the thorny ground. They look the part for a season, but they do not endure, and they fizzle out and die. And it's only the fourth ground that produces fruit. And there's this continual reminder in the book of Revelation and in Hebrews to continue the course, to endure until the end. And again, James's book is full of trials, tribulations, test language. It's not necessarily always talking about your ultimate end, but this is a reminder that if you continue this path, in other words, it is distinctive, the characteristics of a true faith and of someone walking with God in trust all the way to the end they will receive the crown of life. This is how actual believers live their life. They grow. They pass through fire, and they continue on. They don't throw in the towel anytime it gets hurt, anytime there's pain. Is it Proverbs? It says that the wise man falls 7 times but he gets up again, right? We all fall. We all suffer setback and persecution. But do you rise again? This is saying, happy, blessed is the man who remains steadfast and receive that crown of life which God has promised to those who love him. So again, it's comparing the current trials, the current tribulations, the current way that you weather the storm with the overall picture of the life of a believer, with life in general. So it's saying this is how you live in trial. This is what life looks like. This is how you pursue until the end. There is a matter of enduring. So I think that this is not only this book, but this idea is really important for Christians. I think a lot of us have this idea of the faith is all I have to do is pray the prayer, respond to Jesus loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. And so, yes, Jesus, I love you. Come into my life. Just respond, and then it's just kind of happy-go-lucky and have my fire insurance, and one day I'll get through those pearly gates. When instead the picture in the Word of God is you have entered into a race, you have entered into trials, you have entered into tribulation. Continue to stay the course with Jesus Christ all the way to the end. It's just telling us a picture of what life is going to be. Why? Temptations are going to come. Verse 13, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. So this is saying, again, understanding that tests come, trials come, okay, hardship comes, suffering comes. Even though sometimes, and many times, it is God allowing these into our lives. Remember the book of Job. It wasn't God. It wasn't God. It was Satan bringing all of these temptations, all of these. It wasn't the voice of God in the wife of Job who was saying, curse God and die. God was not tempting Job, right? That was Satan tempting Job. That's the picture we're being given there. There's this sense where these external forces, or sometimes internal forces, are boiling to the surface when the heat is turned up, are boiling to the surface, and you're seeing what you're really made of. And you start to feel these temptations. This is why sometimes when we're really, really angry, we mess up and do stupid sin. When we're really emotional is when we give way to our darker urges. You guys know what I'm talking about. When you had a really anxious and stressful day, I should just get drunk and that'll make it all go away. I should just watch some porn. I should just, reach out to that person that I've cut out of my life. I should go back to that old bad habit because it will make me feel a little bit better in the moment, when that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're seeing that part. The suffering has led us to confront our temptations, our flesh, but we're coming about those not by God. God does not tempt us that way. God does not put the little carrot in front of you and say, try to entice you to sin. God is not enticing anyone to sin. But when we go through hardship and trial and tribulation, our insides become enticed to sin. What are ways that I can alleviate pain? What are ways that I can end this suffering? What are ways that I can get around this trial? That's what's happening in the midst of temptation. So you aren't supposed to say, I'm being tempted by God. Like, thanks God, right? That's not what we're supposed to be doing. God does not tempt anyone, neither is he tempted with evil. This is an important little verse, because we're always like, well, I thought Jesus came to earth and he was tempted in all ways. There is a sense. This is why we need to understand theology, the hypostatic union, right? We have the nature of God and the nature of man in the man Jesus. Two natures, one person. And so his human side was being tempted with sin. In other words, like when he's really, really, think of the temptations of Christ. He's out in the wilderness. He's really, really hungry. Satan says, command the stone to become bread. His flesh was like, yeah, let's do that. I'm really hungry. There was a temptation there because he was a natural man, but he didn't give in to the temptation. See, temptations can be there. I'm walking down the road. I see a sign. I see a woman. It's there. And I'm tempted. And in a moment, I can decide what I'm going to do with that temptation. I can indulge the temptation, or I can not indulge the temptation. And this is even a temptation for me. This is a temptation for all men. But all of us have our own temptations where our flesh desires something, whatever it might be. And then the question is, what do we then do with that? So This is telling us it's not God who's drawing us off that way. And Jesus was not tempted. He was tempted, or his flesh was tempted to respond, but he never responded in that way, which is where sin. And this is important for us to understand, because a lot of us think that if we are being tempted, then there's something wrong with me. Yes and no, there is something wrong with you because you're sinful. You still have a sinful nature. But no, just being tempted is not the same as committing the sin. Okay? We should all understand very, very clearly that, when Jesus says to look at a woman after her in lust is the same as committing adultery, we should understand, what if you then go and also commit adultery? That's a lot worse. There's the temptation, there's giving into the temptation, and then there's going and committing the law breaking. So that there are differences here that we need to remember. Verse 14, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desires. Some people have desires that are going to lead them into certain lanes, certain temptations, certain sins, and we just need to be aware. But it is coming from inside of us. I have a sin nature. I know what tempts me. You have a sin nature. You know what tempts you. So when those things come up, we should recognize, there's me again. There's that part of me that wants to draw me away from God. There's that part of me that's riled up in temptation. There's that part of me that comes to the surface when I'm going through it. And we need to recognize it and stay steadfast under trial. Turn to God. Again, like we looked at earlier, when you lack wisdom, call out to God. Look for God and help in those times. When you're being tempted, cry out to God in those times. Usually when we say we can't turn back from a temptation, it's because we have already been indulging it, for the last half hour, the last week, the whole day. And when it comes to the point of pulling the trigger, we feel like we can't do anything about it, when the fact of the matter is we should have done something about it a long time ago. We should have addressed it when it first came in, when it was first just a fleeting that passed me by. And if I just, like the meme of the guy looking back, if we indulge that things, then yes, it grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and then when you get to that point, it does feel almost impossible to disengage and to avert said sin. But that is because we are feeding into our sinful desires at that point. We aren't doing what we were supposed to do, which is to flee sin. But so each person is tempted when he's lured and enticed by his own desire. It's my desire enticing me. It's your desire enticing you. 15. Then desire when it is conceived gives birth to sin, and sin when it is fully grown brings forth death. So he's warning them, first of all, remain steadfast on their trial, but also remember, trials are going to bring things to the surface. They're going to bubble up inside of you. You're going to start to see the worst side of you. You're going to start to see things that you hate about yourself. You're going to start being tempted in ways you haven't been tempted in before. That's part of trial and tribulation, because we're then left to our own devices, and our own devices wants to deal with our problems, not with going to the Lord, but with going to how we normally do such things. And so it's kind of a double whammy, right? You're in persecution, you're suffering for your faith, count it all joy, remain steadfast. Oh yeah, and you're also going to be tempted. Thanks, right? But hopefully you can see that if you're remaining steadfast, okay, if you're holding close to God, if you're acknowledging Him, I always think of one of my favorite verses, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. If you are doing those things, if you're trusting in God with all your heart, okay, then you're going to begin to lean on His understanding and not your own. Problem with trials and temptations, we begin to lean on our own way of doing things. Well, this isn't working out. Prayer didn't work out, so I'm going to go do my own thing. But no, we're called to stay the course, to endure suffering, to even learn from it, even to count it joy, and then to recognize that we will be tempted in that. And that's part of the trial. That's part of overcoming. So in the midst of suffering, you can even be learning to combat your sin nature. And how great is that? That's why it's telling us, happy is the man who does these things. Man, I am learning to turn off my sin nature. I am learning to turn off all of the things that I usually go to for catharsis, for relief, for to put these things to rest. And it says, as we do this, or if we don't do this, it gives birth to sin, like I said. But if you continue in that path, we're told sin leads to death. We already know that the result of sin coming into the world was death, but this could be death of your faith. This could be death of pursuing during trial. This could be every time I have an encounter with that temptation, I fall through in the sin. If you aren't addressing it in the right way, if you aren't calling out for wisdom when it first begins, if you aren't learning to turn away and not blaming God, understanding it's coming from you, and so what that means is there's something you can do to address it, because you now have the Spirit of God inside of you. There are different things you can go about differently now. As you begin to address these things in turn, you will find that blessing and that happiness. So I want to encourage you, remain steadfast under trial. Count it all joy. Even discover that happiness can come about if you remain the course and hold on to God, of course. Not by might, but not by power, but by the Spirit, says the Lord. So rely on God and look to Him, and you will find ways to navigate the storm. So thank you guys so much. See you next time.